I'll get started now, and then people can kind of join in as they wish. So my name's Ella. I don't know if I've met any of you before, if you're fellow RSPB colleagues, but I'm the Community and Youth Development Officer for the Climate Forth project. So this is our Ask Me Anything webinar, and today it's focused on heritage resilience planning and the creation of our 4 local resilience plans. And this is one of the pilot activities in the delivery phase of Climate Forth. And our presenter today is Alice. She is a senior associate at Glic, and I'll be handing over to her shortly. But just a few housekeeping points to go over. As I said, the session is being recorded and it's going to be shared on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be featured, feel free to switch off your camera. Just remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. You can use the chat at the top to interact at any point, and if you need any kind of tech support or anything, I'll try and help you. We'll be doing the Q&A at the end of the presentation, so feel free to drop any questions you have that come up during it in the little Q&A box at the top. I'll pop a little message in a moment so you know where that is, and we'll pick these up at the end. So just to give you a brief overview of the Climate Forth project, if you've not heard of us before. Climate Forth stands for Furthering Our Resilience Through Heritage, and it's run by the Inner Forth Futures Partnership. This partnership's made up of 9 organisations, so we're led by the RSPB. We've also got Nature Scot, Stirling, Falkirk, Clackmannanshire and 5 councils, Green Action Trust, the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust, and Historic Environment Scotland. Hi, everyone's just joining. So I'm just giving you a bit of an introduction about Climate Forth. So yeah, our project is 3.5 years long in total. So delivery to the end of 2026. So kind of in the last 6 months of delivery, and we're funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and a range of co-funders. So we work within the Inner Forth region, which covers parts of Stirling, West Fife, Clackmannanshire and Falkirk. So you can see that little map there. So if you're not familiar with kind of Scotland, that's like central Scotland based. And that's our core project area in the red, and then our wider engagement area for some of our activities are in the blue there. So the kind of aims and objectives of Climate Forth. We want to make sure that the Inner Forth's heritage is valued and help to inspire to reach Scotland's net zero climate targets. We're trying to increase the resilience of the area's natural and built heritage, and we want to ensure that the people and places of the Inner Forth have an increased resilience to change. So heritage supporting the economy, healthy lifestyles, sustainable choices, and a just transition. And overall, Climate Forth focuses on 3 themes: increasing climate resilience within communities, heritage, and businesses. We've got 15 activities in total on the project, and their aim isn't to just kind of undertake an activity. They're also importantly pilot activities, so we're testing what works and what doesn't work and trying to inform and share these learnings within the UK or wider field. So that's kind of what part of these lunchtime learning sessions are, kind of evaluating what's occurred and what we've learned, and see if we can help other organisations, projects and local authorities. So that's a bit of a background, and now I will pass over to Alice, who's a senior associate at Glic, and they led on local resilience plans.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I guess kind of to intro a little bit about Glic. Glic are a community and economic development consultancy. We're based in Glasgow and Argyll. It's quite a small team, and we've got a big focus on delivering community engagement and kind of planning creation. We were brought on by the Climate Forth team to deliver the local resilience plans. And what I'm going to kind of talk through today is the process that we went through, some of our learning from that, and kind of some things that, you know, in hindsight, we maybe would have done differently, that if you're planning on maybe developing something similar, you can learn from what we've completed. So I guess to start with, it would be helpful if I explained what a local resilience plan is. It's maybe a new term to you. In the context of Climate Forth, a local resilience plan is kind of intended to be a bit of a stepping stone towards the creation of local place plans and getting communities to think about their area, think about their own capacities, and help them kind of shape how they want their areas to evolve. A local resilience plan also has a very strong climate action element to it. And we've kind of used heritage as a hook to get people more engaged with climate. Climate can be quite scary or a little bit inaccessible for everybody, but heritage is something that's a bit more something that everyone experiences a lot more easily than potentially kind of climate action and climate related challenges or themes. So the rest of this presentation, as I mentioned, is kind of going to highlight our local resilience planning process and some of the lessons that we've learned across the 4 communities that we delivered this in. So that was Batesford and Langley's, Hawkhill and surrounding areas, Kincardine and Ferlin. We obviously got to kind of test this across 4 very different community contexts, and kind of we're able to adapt the approach in some places and kind of learn what worked well and tested different kind of delivery methods. So be able to share some of that with you today. I've managed to distill down about 6 months into kind of 3 key kind of steps that we went through in kind of this community heritage resilience planning process. First stage was kind of this engagement and evidence gathering and community engagement and evidence gathering stage that kind of revolved around workshops and a heritage open call. Then kind of moved into actually creating the plans and using that evidence. And then finally, we had a participatory budgeting kind of stage as well. So kind of going to walk through each of these steps and talk through what worked well, the challenges, and as I said, some of the lessons that we've learned there. So to start off with, the workshops were a vehicle in which to introduce the idea of a local resilience plan to the communities and get them kind of familiar with the 2 themes within there of heritage and climate. So we found what worked well was having, being very clear on what our workshops were. We developed 3 workshops that kind of were aimed to build up people's context knowledge to be able to come up with these actions at the end that would be able to go into the plan. So our first workshop centered around defining heritage within their community. We used maps. Everyone loves a map. Everyone loves to see their own area on a map and point at things and say why those things mean things to them. So we used maps and kind of looked at coming up with a definition of a heritage asset in these different communities because it might vary. The second workshop was focused on climate resilience and explaining and kind of what that means, and getting people to think about climate resilience or climate change within their own community. And then the final workshop was about bringing those 2 elements together and kind of thinking, okay, if these are our heritage assets, what do we need to do to make them more climate resilient going forward? So that structure was really helpful. As I said, we had very clear facilitation resources, maps, kind of little icebreaker, kind of question like games at the beginning of each workshop. We also used kind of interactive kind of draw on things so people felt like they were very included in the process. A big draw and something that I would definitely recommend you budget for when you're doing workshops is food and having an incentive to get people along. That became a real kind of main drawing point for getting along. Some young people in Batesford and Langley's, they came to one of the first workshops and then came to the further few because they were promised food further down the line as well. And what we really found was that the conversations that we were having with communities was really, really valuable and insightful. We were also aware that kind of these workshops are quite intensive. And in some communities, they very clearly from the outset kind of said to us that we don't think that's going to work for us. So we adapted in Kincardine some of our materials into a drop-in session as well. And that did work, but they really had to be manned drop-in sessions, and we had to be quite attentive and making sure that we explained the context to each of the kind of little stations that we had in that drop-in space. So there's definitely ability to kind of like flex kind of that workshop setting. Some of the challenges we had with the workshops for us was the fact that we were working across kind of 4 communities meant that there was a little bit less time for early relationship building to start to like for promotion of those workshops, or we maybe couldn't, we couldn't dedicate enough time to kind of get in there and get in with all of the local groups as much as we would maybe wanted to. And in some of the communities, just because of the way that the Climate Force project worked, felt a little bit top down in some cases. So maybe I think learning would be maybe trying to get some community organisations to facilitate some of the workshops and lead on that as well. Another challenge was maintaining attendance. As I mentioned, food worked quite well in some of them, but sometimes we had quite a big attendance at first workshop, and by the end, less so, or people just came along for the end workshop and didn't have kind of all of the context build up of the previous couple of workshops as well. So there's definitely some challenges with the workshop format, especially that long form one of getting people to dedicate their time to something like that. However, kind of general learnings that we think we had from it were definitely developing those relationships is important. I think we could have had better attendance if we had a little bit more time, and we're concentrating maybe just on one community and really developing the relationships there and getting more into the communities, and maybe adapting the workshops around community events, or having a mix of drop-in and long form kind of stuff as well. Where we had a lot of success was in Flynn, where the Flynn's community voice and their community gardener were very involved in the community, and we used them as a route into. They were already trusted. They were already, quite engaged with the community, and the community were happy to kind of listen and be responsive to them, opposed to us as Glic as kind of external facilitators. So it was really helpful using them in that process. I think we probably wanted to keep the workshops quite close together to keep that momentum going. And as I mentioned, being able to kind of adapt to the specific community needs that we were looking at. Outside of the workshops, we also had something that we called a heritage open call. This was basically a way of trying to gather more opinions beyond those who were at the workshops, and we basically distilled workshops down into a survey. So the survey kind of asked people what they thought a heritage asset was, asked them to kind of identify some of the heritage assets they thought, and then we also went into that climate resilience element as well. It had varying success, I would say. It did provide a different avenue to gather opinions, but it lacked kind of the context and the bigger picture. So some of the responses that we got weren't great because they hadn't had that kind of like build up and engagement with us and facilitation as well. So I think if we were to kind of do it again, would maybe think is an open call necessary, even like, do we need to do this? And if we do, we maybe accompany it with an in-person engagement event, a launch event, thinking again about what community activities are already going on, where we already have kind of an engaged audience. And we really found that whilst the Heritage Open Call mainly just kind of justified the discussions that we were already having. There wasn't really anything new from that, and it maybe just kind of bolstered kind of the numbers of engagement that we had, but didn't offer anything new. It just reaffirmed pieces. So it depends what your goal is. For us, we had to show that we had a big kind of like a certain number of kind of people engaged. But if you really want in-depth and qualitative discussion and learning within communities, then the workshops were definitely the better way to go. Moving on to the actual local resilience plans themselves. So after we kind of did the evidence gathering, had these workshops, had the Heritage Open Call, we then moved into kind of the creation of these plans. Now, there was not really a structure to them at this point. It was up to us at Glic to work out what this was. And we kind of just decided to follow the process of the workshops and use the workshops as the structure, which also meant that each of the plans were very personalized because each community had a slightly different approach to engagement and had slightly different feedback, slightly different evidence. In Flynn, they kind of didn't come up with just a heritage definition. They also came up with this kind of like heritage asset mind map. So it was really fun transposing that into the local resilience plan. And equally in Kincardine, where it was more of a drop-in event, it was much more difficult to get one clear definition. So looked at different ways of presenting the information that we had that was we didn't want to, like, they're standardized, but they're also all unique because of all of the different evidence and feedback that we got. We found that the best plans were ones, again, where we were able to touch back in with communities post the workshops, where there were kind of key community representatives that we could check in with on actions that we were developing and really thinking about their capacity and operational ability, and what, that we weren't coming up with actions that were unfeasible for that community to deliver, essentially. If we move on to kind of some of the challenges we had with local resilience planning, in our specific context, it was slightly limited time for developing the plans. So we developed them over 2 months post workshop. We needed a little bit more time to do more of that sense checking with community representatives and making sure there was capacity there for delivery. We also struggled ever so slightly with the climate focus and making sure that all of the actions were clearly linked to climate resilience. Quite a lot of it became quite heritage focused instead. And so I think that was something we'd maybe come back to and think about differently a second time round. And also kind of once the workshops had ended, the ongoing engagement with the communities kind of ended until we got back around to participatory budgeting. So I think a way to feedback or re-engage with communities and in kind of an in-person sense before we get to participatory budgeting would have been really helpful as well there. So a little overview of what we learned from that. Kind of identifying those key community kind of custodians, delivery partners is really key when you're developing the kind of resilience plan to make sure those actions are deliverable. Thinking about actions that have short, medium, and long-term kind of timelines, building in that engagement. Another really key element was including indicative costings. I think this helped communities see the scale of some of the actions they were having. There were some smaller actions that could be delivered quickly, had small budgets, but maybe didn't have a big impact. And equally, there was some that had high costings, but could deliver a big impact. It was also helpful having costings, indicative costings there when it came to kind of the next stage, the participatory budgeting stage as well. So that was, I definitely suggest kind of including that. I think quite a lot of action planning nowadays has actions involved, but doesn't think about the budget that comes along with that. And I think it's really helpful to see kind of if you are going to be delivering these actions that you're putting out, what is the actual cost associated with it. Moving on to kind of our final phase, at least from Glic's involvement, was the participatory budgeting. So if you're not familiar with participatory budgeting, this is about kind of using kind of democratic voting within communities to decide how a specific budget is spent. So within the Climate Force context, each community had access to £45,000 of funding to deliver their potential actions. Even when you maybe don't have a specific set of a specific budget available to do participatory budgeting, I still think it's really valuable doing a voting session with communities just to re-emphasize where priorities are if you are trying to go out and get funding. It just shows to the funder not only have communities been involved in developing this plan, they've then also said this is what we want to do first as well. So some of the things that worked well for us during participatory budgeting is we really try to keep it as simple as possible. It can be quite a complex thing to explain to people. So we really went in on explaining the process at the beginning in as simple a way as possible. And we also tried to make it quite tactile. So we used pebbles, stones as kind of the voting mechanisms. And we found that kind of our learnings from the workshops we put into place in the participatory budgeting phase, where we kind of looked at identifying pre-existing community events or high traffic community hotspots. So in Bainsford and Langley's, we attended their children's festival. In Kincardine, we plonked ourselves outside of the co-op. In Hawk Hill, we were at their community centre on some of their high traffic days. And in Flynn, slightly different, they were very engaged communities. So we felt it was okay to kind of have just a drop-in session in their church hall. So again, I think adapting and thinking about each of the communities and what kind of engagement levels we've had with them so far in the workshop phase, used that to inform to make sure that participatory budgeting was also successful. We also developed a kind of online version of the PB, and this was also it went down really well as well. To move on to some of the challenges we had with participatory budgeting, the biggest one was actually that online piece. So it's quite a complex kind of process trying to explain to someone via words and not via kind of talking them through the process. So there is tools out there that are specifically for online PB voting, but they are very expensive to access. So we kind of just worked with SurveyMonkey and kind of developed our own graphics and explanations to lay out that PB process. And I would be happy to kind of share what that looked like if anyone was interested. We spent a lot of time trying to work out what that looked like. And again, just because of kind of the complexity in explaining it and it being voting and it being democratic, we found that the process needed kind of constant oversight and facilitation. So again, quite time intensive if you're going to be conducting this. However, what we learned again is just like that being clear about the process and planning the journey that we wanted that voter to go through. So this was like a little mock-up that we did before we got to kind of as we were applying the participatory budgeting process. So really thought about, okay, what are we going to tell them? How are we going to make sure that they go through and understand what they're doing and what they're voting on? So we thought that was really helpful. We also found that it would maybe have been beneficial if we'd had a couple more PB sessions, a bit more voting opportunities in person. So we had the PB online open for about a month. But within that, we only did one in-person session per community. But it maybe would have been beneficial to have a couple more in there as well. So yeah, that is kind of a overview of the kind of three key steps that we took in this process. And I guess I'll hand back over to Ella. But yeah,
Yes,
thank
we
you.
thought we'd just finish off before we get to kind of questions and just give you a bit of an update, which kind of puts into context, I guess, what this has ended up with, which is kind of the delivery phase of these projects. So I thought I'd show you a few nice photos of some of the communities. So this is Hawk Hill in Clackmannanshire, and we're working in this case with Hawk Hill Community Association, and they want to kind of create, one of the actions that's voted on was a little mini farm and training area on the centre. So this has been created. You can kind of see this area there with these raised beds, and they've also got a polytunnel for growing, kind of hosting practical training sessions, and hopefully in the future supplying some of the kind of produce and things that they grow to their on-site shop. So the photo on the right is also a recent session, which was hosted by TCB with some of the pupils from Alloa Academy, who were kind of doing some sowing of seeds, learning about planting fruit plants, and a bit about composting as well, which was really nice. Next one is in Bainsford and Langleys, which is a community in Falkirk. On the left is a project at Dawson Park. And this picture is solar-powered path lights, which were installed, I think it's last October now. And this is kind of providing a climate resilience means to light the park and encourage greater use by locals. We've already had some really good feedback from the community who said that, you know, they wouldn't have walked through it in the past, but that this has made a really big difference. And Dawson Park have also been doing some biodiversity enhancements, so planting some trees in a community orchard as well. And then on the right, funding to Bainsford Hall went towards solar battery storage for the community centre, allowing them to store energy from their solar panels. And this is going to be reducing running costs, which is especially important as the centre has recently come into community ownership. This one here is RSPB Black Devon Wetlands, which was the other project voted for within Hawk Hill. Works have been carried out in January and February of this year, creating new islands to provide safe roosting and nesting sites for birds, creating more wetland pools around the viewing structure, and ultimately bringing kind of wildlife closer to people. And then on the right is a little picture from Kincardine in southwest Fife. And one of their projects is using funding to create a digital archive, so kind of preserving key history in the area, which otherwise is at risk from kind of damage from kind of water and kind of getting lost. And that's just a bit of a snapshot. And there's more updates on our kind of website and on our socials, and you can kind of see how the rest of these projects are being delivered. I'll also just highlight here that we've got a few more Ask Me Anything sessions coming up. So if you're interested in joining any of those, please, again, just drop an email to book your spot on them. And also thank you to our funders. Before we head into the questions, National Auditory Heritage Fund and a range of co-funders that we have for supporting the project. And we do have a few questions that have been sent in, but I'll kind of allow you guys, if you want to put your hand up and put your camera on and mic, to ask any questions, but you can also just pop your questions in that little Q&A box that I highlighted at the top. Yeah. No worries if not, give a few minutes. Yeah, Claire?
Hi there. Thanks so much for sharing all that information. Really fascinating, your approach and your learning. I was just thinking about, you mentioned that in some cases it was, kind of enticing to offer some catering for people to attend. I was wondering if there was any barriers around transport and childcare that you came across that were something you had to encounter just to get really good and diverse representation.
Yeah, I definitely think in some cases in Bainsford and Langley's, we had a couple of attendees bring along kind of younger children to the event. And I would say we hadn't actually planned for that, but adapted quite quickly and ended up kind of doing utilizing the resources we had and kind of creating a little like drawing session for the younger kids and still getting them to think about heritage and kind of asking some like more appropriate questions to them, just being like, what's your favorite thing in your area, can you draw it for me? And that was really lovely. And actually, I think some of those photos ended up in the final plan for Bainsford and Langley's as well. So that I think was definitely a learning for us as well. And going forward, would definitely almost have a younger children what I'm trying to say, like resource or facilitation technique in the back pocket, in case that happened, and maybe even can promote it in the future as well. Kind of being like, don't worry, everyone's welcome. We'll find a task or something to keep everybody entertained. I think from an accessibility point of view and transport point of view, in Bainsford and Langley's, we toyed around with 2 venue options, and ended up going with one that had a kind of better open access kind of policy than another one where it was kind of a manned desk and you had to kind of sign in to kind of make it a bit more welcoming as well. So it was definitely consideration. We didn't get much feedback about transport and that being an issue. But definitely from that kind of getting younger children engaged and making sure we chose the right venue for the community was important. Thanks, Claire.
Maybe just head into some of the ones that were sent in, but obviously everyone just jump in if you've got anything else. And James has maybe popped a little message in. Yeah, that they were kind of central to the communities, all of these places. So they were like key community spots, and therefore quite accessible. I think that definitely made a difference. And I think although you were kind of talking about the open call not necessarily having a huge uptake, I think that did kind of provide the option at least that people could join that way if they wanted to. Yeah, one of the questions was kind of what role does heritage play specifically in helping communities respond to climate change and building resilience? I guess in this context, heritage is obviously a huge part of our project, but something that people are inspired by, and everyone can kind of find unity in heritage. I guess defining heritage as something that's not just kind of old buildings, but just things that people value and that people want to work to protect for the future is really important. And using that to then navigate climate change kind of drew all that together, I think. I'm not sure, Alice.
Yeah, I think definitely what it also became is a way of also kind of showing how climate change is already affecting us and how some of kind of the heritage assets have already been affected by climate change. So it was quite a nice way to kind of exemplify that and can shows how things can change over a period of time as well. And I think that piece and also heritage assets, not just, we talked a lot about like the timeline of a heritage asset and when something becomes a heritage asset. And quite a lot of people, quite a lot of the communities kind of were like, I think it's anything in kind of the near past or distant past, which is why I think quite a lot of people felt a lot of kind of identified their community halls as heritage assets or their local parks as heritage assets. It was kind of, we were quite broad in defining letting people be broad in what a heritage asset was. was to them.
Yeah, definitely. Daniel, you got a question?
Yeah, just directly related to that, and I'm really sorry I missed the first couple of slides. You might have said this, but did you use the word heritage? Was heritage the word that you used in those workshops, and did you in trying to bring people in your first outreach to communities, were you using that word? So how accessible did you find that? Because I'm working on developing an equivalent sort of type of program around species in Northern Ireland, and just simply thinking about the words that we use when we talk to people about the things we want to talk to them about. Did you feel that using that word, if you did, kind of could have been a barrier to the type of people who responded, or their degree of involvement in this kind of thing already?
Yeah, we did use it, and I personally didn't find it a barrier. One of the very first activities that we did with people in the workshops was a kind of like a what like I had two kind of photos of, and kind of asked, okay, which one of these do you think is a heritage site? And the idea was getting them to realize the breadth of that word, and getting them to, so almost if they didn't have that knowledge of heritage, the first activity was getting them familiarized with that. So I had like photos of sculptures and photos of like the I'm trying to think of a good example that I had. I think it was like I had like an old town hall building, but I also had kind of a kind of like tower block architectural kind of piece as well, and getting people to think beyond just heritage being something old and fancy. It like in that sense, it can also be something a bit modern. So I think if it was an issue, the first task that we had, I think, helped to kind of get everyone onto an even footing about thinking about that, which is again why the workshops were so good, I think, opposed to we also had like an online survey that surmised the workshops. But I think being able to have that conversation and have those knowledge, the workshop worked as not just like data and evidence gathering for the creation of the plans, but also helped improve people's knowledge who came along to them as well, I would say. Was that helpful?
Yeah, thanks. I guess the second part of my question, Jennifer, is around, do you think you were reaching new, widening participation through the activities? What proportion of people do you think were, potentially already involved in either environmental or heritage, activities?
I think
Did you get a feel for that?
I think quite a lot of people were. I think actually where we got the most engagement was in the participatory budgeting phase. And I think it's hard in these things is getting people to come up with ideas, but when they have a lot of opinions when you go to them with ideas.
Yes.
So whilst maybe during the workshops we had people that who might normally engage in this kind of stuff, kind of creating those actions, the participatory budgeting phase was a lot more open. We had, I think, a lot more engagement during that piece. And I think because we were presenting them with something and they weren't having to do too much of their own thinking, they could comment on stuff that was already in front of them. I think that was a lot more accessible. So I think it's good that there's something in making sure, you might not engage the same people at all of these different points in the process.
That's really important. Yeah.
But if you can if being aware of that, I think, is important, and identifying which are the most important bits you want to get people's feedback in and have that widest reach on. And as I said, ours was participatory budgeting, but I do think like prioritization within communities, and it's a good way to feed back the results of a plan and stuff as well, is via that kind of method.
Thank you.
No worries.
Great, thanks. Yeah, definitely agree on that. And I definitely think it's a tool that even if people were interested in kind of their local assets and what was important to them, and a kind of key community representatives. A lot of them weren't super engaged in kind of knowing about the environment and climate, I don't think. So it definitely worked as a way to introduce climate change without it being, the kind of at the forefront of it at all times. Yeah.
So you feel that was the local element to that did that? That if they weren't particularly involved in climate or environment before, the fact that it was local, it was relevant.
Yeah, I guess making it kind of understandable at a local scale, and just more measurable as well, seeing kind of where the smaller climate impacts might occur and might impact your local park or your community centre. Because I know for a lot of people it is overwhelming to think about climate action at a bigger scale, at a countrywide or a global scale. So I think kind of having the two of those things together worked quite nicely in this project. No worries, Amanda. Yeah, obviously I appreciate everyone's lunchtime, so if you have to hop off, then feel free to. If anyone's got any more questions, you can stay on for a bit longer. Let's see what else I've got. Other one. Guess we touched on that a bit with Claire's question about how kind of young people and underrepresented groups are included. Yeah, I think it's kind of location-wise, we try to keep everything as accessible as possible, and I think using those key community representatives kind of hopefully widen participation a bit more, to kind of people that we wouldn't have reached kind of through our means as well as a project. I don't know if you have any more input, Alice.
Yeah, I think as I said, we ended up using we had Greg's the Bainsford and Langley's sessions, and that really drew this group of teenagers in. So it was maybe not even, it wasn't maybe planning for it, but it was a learning point. Is, think about the incentives for, if you do want to get young people, is there a specific incentive that would really appeal to them to get them along? And I think what's been great about this whole process is it is a pilot, so all of this learning is really good. Like, I'm kind of okay to say if something could have been better. So I think that piece on having some, maybe promoting the fact that we could have younger children along and we'd have something for them to do, is something I'd take forward into other kind of planning things, and also maybe thinking more about incentives to get younger people along as well. I think those are two kind of routes in as well. Definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I'll just move on, do a final question, then we could probably wrap up and let everyone get back to their lunches. One of them is maybe more relevant to me, I guess, was what the biggest challenges communities face when moving from ideas to delivery, and how kind of we support them. And I guess that kind of varies depending on what project you are and what you're supporting. I guess we're quite lucky, and this is kind of a big focus for us, and we're a partnership project, so we did have that added benefit of being able to work with local councils and getting support from them, which help the community groups, and providing contacts which help move projects forward is also pretty crucial. And I guess obviously one of the big challenges is a lot of community groups are volunteers, so having the capacity to do that and to deliver these projects is quite difficult. I think the local resilience plans created a really good foundation and a basis, and like Alice was saying, with the highlighting the costings and detailing ideas of the projects, had this foundation, so it wasn't so abstract to start things. And we've definitely faced a number of problems. There's always things that you can't predict. So in Kincardine was one of them, which one of the projects that was voted on was their community centre. and kind of installing a renewable heating system there. And then unfortunately, there was like a sinkhole built on old mining shafts. So that occurred about a year ago. And unfortunately, the community centre hasn't been able to reopen. So we kind of had to navigate that and come back to the community and think about how else the funding could be spent and how it could be best used. And that ended up being smaller projects, which felt more manageable for the community groups. So I think just really going back and being flexible and seeing how you can still take, I guess, climate and heritage action, even if it is at a smaller scale, is pretty important. I think we'll wrap it up there, unless anyone has any questions. Obviously, if you do, or you think of anything afterwards, feel free to just drop us an email and we can get back to you and share any more learnings. With this project as well, we're in the process of creating a legacy guide, which will kind of be detailing all the steps in the process of making these plans and how they can be replicated in the future. So obviously drop an email if you're interested in that, and we can kind of share that when that is created. But also just keep an eye on our website or social media as well. And yeah, as I said, there's a few more Ask Me Anything sessions coming up. So please feel free to join them as well if you're interested. And thank you so much for taking your time, and thank you as well, Alice, for joining us and
it's been lovely.
Adding so much insight. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks very much, guys. Brilliant.
Bye.
Bye.